Welcome to this next episode of Battleground Chats, where I talk to interesting people about their risk and resilience journey. And I'm thrilled today to have all the way from London, Martin Simpson join me on Battleground Chats. Martin, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks for the invitation, Craig. I hope I can live up to the expectations of being interesting.
Oh, it's a low bar, so it's very easy. But no, it's wonderful. You're our first guest from England. We've been on a journey in the US. We've been around Australia, so great to be in the UK. Battleground's just launched there as well, so it's great to be branching out. But Martin, tell me a bit about yourself, about your journey, and how you kind of got to where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I guess like all journeys, it probably didn't take the path that I was expecting to. So I'm now the founder and CEO of a boutique advisory firm here in the UK, focused very much on resilience. Yep. So what does that mean? It's all about helping our clients minimize the impact of disruption, and we typically focus on minimizing that impact of disruption as a consequence of technology failure. So that's been our focus.
Which has been in the media recently, so there's a lot we can unpack there. But take me back. So how did you end up at the point where you've started this boutique? Was it planned or just kind of the journey took you there?
No, the journey took me there. I mean, to be honest, that's probably a pretty true representation of my entire career, to be honest. So I've only ever wanted to be a fighter pilot from about 18 months old. I'm 48, and I still would love to be a fighter pilot when I grow up.
So you're almost there.
Yeah, that's right. So I've had to satisfy myself with flying old aeroplanes in my spare time, which is also absolutely brilliant, and probably a subject of another conversation. But so I was sponsored through school and university by the Air Force. I went to RAF Cranwell, which is the officer college. I then got chopped because of my bad eyesight, so they wouldn't let me fly. And look, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I have to be, I'm eternally grateful to my old school form tutor who encouraged me to go off to university. So I went and did a degree.
So hang on. So how far did you get into the Air Force course before you realised the eyesight? Isn't that something you pick up quite early on?
Yeah, well, I mean, this was in the mid late 90s, and all the rules changed. So so they were looking for reasons to bin people off, and my eyesight was always marginal. And I think I just fell below the line. So there were a bunch of us who one of my mates had a knee operation that was completely acceptable one day, and then
not.
A year or so later, it was deemed to not be good enough to be put fit for aircrew. So they tried to get me to do stuff on the ground, and my heart was very much in flying, and I wanted to be a pilot. So I had to take stock and think, right, what do I do? And I had a degree in engineering or communication systems engineering, and then I went to General Electric. I joined GE Capital's IT graduate program, I think called IMLP. It's a 2-year program, 4 6-month rotations across different parts of the business, and it was absolutely brilliant. It was exactly what I needed, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and GE was such a phenomenal organisation to start my career. So I spent. But
that was really in the heyday of GE, wasn't it?
100%, yeah. So I was there when I joined, when Jack Welch was still running the show.
The guru.
It was again, I could talk about this forever. It was a phenomenal organisation. Jack's leadership style, for an organisation that was something like 350,000 people strong back in those days, you really felt his presence and his leadership and influence. Huge emphasis was placed on leadership skills, networking, looking after your people, filling voids. don't see something that needs to be done and just walk past it. Roll up your sleeves and get stuck in. And that very much kind of rang true, I suppose, with all my background, even as a kid. I've never really been someone to kind of sit still and let things go past. So I did 2 years on IMLP. Then I was joined GE's corporate audit staff. And I also got a Lean Six Sigma black belt qualification as well. And again, corporate audit staff was such a phenomenal experience. I mean, it was a youngish guy in my mid-late 20s, and we were just being sent all around the world trying to solve some of GE's grittiest problems. And I worked with some of the brightest people. And that was really where my sort of risk and resilience journey began. I was living in the States, and this is indicative of GE's culture, right? So, I got approached by a couple of the big four, Deloitte and EY. I wasn't really looking to go anywhere, but I spoke to my mentor, my coach, and they said, why don't you just go to Deloitte and consider it an MBA and then come back in 2 years' time? It'll be a brilliant place to learn things outside of GE. So I was like, that's a great way of looking at it.
That's actually great advice, I think, because it also works the other way, right? I'm a career Big Four person, but we often advise people go out into industry, see if you enjoy that, learn from that, and come back in. So it's a vice versa thing.
Exactly. So I took that opportunity and I went to Deloitte, and I went there kind of with a view of only ever being there for a couple of years. And I ended up being there for 10, and, I really enjoyed Deloitte. It's a great opportunity to do a lot of different things. And, whilst I would say I'm a resilience specialist, a resilience expert, it's quite a grand phrase, but, what I love about being a consultant is that no day is ever the same. And what I really like doing is, getting into my client problems and unraveling them and getting to the bottom of solving those difficult business centric problems. And 10 years in Deloitte really enabled me to do that. And I spent quite a lot of time down in Australia, actually, with a big client. I was involved in some, in a big bribery and corruption investigation. That was an incredible experience.
Fantastic.
My work went up to the SEC and the DOJ. It was truly an amazing experience. And I've continued on that trajectory. I did a short period of time with PwC, and then went to Alex Partners, which is lesser known here in Europe, but Alex was again an incredible organisation, an absolute privilege to spend a few years with an organisation like that. I mean, it was the caliber and quality of people. I mean, you'd sort of look in the room and you're permanently worried that you weren't the smartest person, so you just try to.
And so, Martin, you talk about you go to the Big Four. You've done an engineering degree. You've gone to GE. Did you consciously drop the engineering part, or it just everything kind of just evolved as your career?
Everything's evolved. Yeah, I mean, look, this might not be a great thing to admit to, but I've never really had a big plan. I've kind of taken opportunities as they've sort of presented themselves, right? And I've really enjoyed that. I've had some incredible experiences. I mean, if you ask 20-year-old Martin, this is not the career I thought I was going to have. And then to bring it right up to speed, I spent the last couple of years working as a contractor, through my own entity, Big Wing, but working with some old friends from Deloitte and PwC, doing operational resilience, technology risk, cyber resilience type work, predominantly focused on financial services because that's where the regulatory driver is. But I still maintain, all firms should aspire to be resilient, right? Doing the right thing when no one is looking is just as important, even if the regulator's not making you do it. And then, come earlier this year or late last year, the contract or the work I was working on ended, and a number of us actually all found ourselves kind of looking around going, right, well, what should we do next? So I've now sort of doubled down on big wing advisory.
I love that name.
I was going to say,
with your flying and your
that's right. I can double click a bit on the background of the name if you like. But yeah, the big wing was a thing from the thing from the Battle of Britain, and the idea was that you harness the power of the few to protect the many, right? That's kind of the principles behind it.
And so with that in mind, then what if you were to reflect on some of the key things you've learned or some of the mantras you hold, just putting you on the spot, what are, a few of the key kind of ideas, theories or things that you've held in good stead along the journey that our listeners might take away from this?
I mean, I draw a lot on my aviation expertise. So whilst I never went on to be a military pilot, the principles of aviation, I think, hold true, certainly in the world of risk and resilience. And by that, I mean, what I think we're not very good at in the corporate world is briefing and debriefing. So, so when we think about severe yet plausible scenarios and things that could cause disruption to our business, how often do we take a step back and say, okay, what is really going to cause me the most pain, right? So, and I kind of bring the analogies of aviation into that, right? So things I'm really keen to avoid doing in my aeroplane are running out of fuel, flying into something, or
just the
getting
basics,
lost,
really.
and I mean, getting lost probably leads to running out of fuel or flying into something, right? But there are core principles that I think, when I go flying, I before I take off, I brief myself about what I'm going to do. I will go out and I will execute some drills that I might not have done for a while. So it might be some aerobatics, it might be pretend the engine's failed. So what am I going to do? Now, all of these things, I think are absolutely good skills to carry into our professional world. And when you think about having clarity about, well, what are those key risks? What could cause me the most amount of pain and why? How do I mitigate that? How do I have controls in place to do that or to mitigate those risks? And how do I measure the performance of those risks? Those controls rather, sorry.
Yeah.
So I think, so for me, it's just about that. It's about the briefing. It's about the testing and rehearsals. I use the phrase resilience through preparedness, right?
Yep.
And
I
think where we are now as a world, and you look at the geopolitical situation, I think prevention is only part of it, right? And I think most organisations, certainly if we're talking about disruption caused by cyber, most organisations are doing something or probably doing what they can. But I think certainly if you look at the tone from the regulators here in the UK and with the recent DORA Act that came in and what other financial services regulators are pushing, the inevitable will happen, right? There will be disruption.
Yep.
Yeah, it's 100% when, right? And I think any organisation that hasn't considered what that disruption could look like and their response to it, they're going to have some difficult questions to answer if they're a regulated entity. And if it's not questions from the regulators, it's going to be questions from their shareholders and their stakeholders,
and customers. Yeah.
So I mean, Heathrow's a great example, right?
Very relevant.
What happened recently? Now it wasn't a cyber incident, but you think about the principles of resilience as opposed to pure cyber. Resilience is built around technology, third parties, people and people and process, and those underlying facilities that enable it. So Heathrow was a combination of a third party service losing a critical piece of critical facility, right? Now that from what I understand and what I've read, and I have a little bit of privileged information because I know some of the investigating team as well. There's whilst there was tests had occurred, people were aware of the idea of a power failure would cause disruption to the airport. there were a number of secondary and tertiary impacts which hadn't been fully explored, which led to, for safety reasons. Now, my understanding is the airfield could have operated for, a reduced capacity. But they chose not to, which when it comes to aviation, you're always going to default, you fail safe, right? That's always what you do with aviation. So shut everything down, rebuild, re-establish and go from there. Now, if you bring that into, I guess, more our world around FS, some of the principles of resilience, and this is where I think some organisations have maybe rebadging ITDR and BCP teams as resilience teams. Well, if you're getting to the point of recovery, you've proven that you're not actually resilient, right? Because being resilient is about taking the punches and carrying on. And now you might need to carry on doing things slower. You might need to do things, at a reduced volume, a reduced number of transactions. But the principles or the spirit of being resilient.
That's the point, right? You don't
stop. You don't actually stop. You might, I use a silly analogy of it's like a punch in the face, right? So, if I'm expecting it, if I train and I'm fit and I'm in, good shape, and I've got some planned actions on if I were to get punched, then I might, I have zero appetite to be punched in the face, but I might be able to tolerate 2 or 3 before I fall over, right? So it brings it back to that conversation about appetite versus tolerance, because if you talk to organisations, well, what's your appetite for a cyber attack? Everyone always says, well, none. Well, that's not really realistic. So
no, exactly.
Actually, let's talk about your appetite might be 0, but what's your tolerance? What could you tolerate?
Exactly. How much
could you tolerate multiple events?
Yeah.
And that's where you start really exposing, well, are you really resilient? So, So, sorry, I was
that's great. No, that's a great insight. That's great insights. And I think, you could talk about the Heathrow outage for hours, because there's many lessons you could learn about leadership, the role of the CEO, gold teams versus bronze teams. There's so many angles we can go into. Unfortunately, we are out of time though. But Martin, it's been great to have you on Battleground Chats, and good luck with your Big Wing advisory. And I know Battleground and Big Wing, we're looking forward to doing some good things together. So thank you for being on Battleground Chats.
Thanks for the invitation. It went really fast. Cheers, Craig.
Bye.